Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast. This is David Waldas here with Nick Musica. Today's topic is like the enthusiasm, how to process your emotions without getting stuck in them. And so, it's a really interesting thing, right? Because, like there's the idea that you have to feel it to heal it. There's the idea that we can process stuff from an energetic perspective. But then there's also the emotions of things. And, most of us, when we're processing the emotions of something, it's not an intentional thing. It's something that it kind of comes in like a big wave, it envelops us, we're inside it, it's our whole world. We lose all our expansiveness and we just feel so deeply whatever it is that we're processing. And we don't have a reference to anything other than that in that moment. Does that sound familiar? That experience, Nick? Is that
I'm tracking and relating 100% right now.
Right? And so, it's something that I thought about for a long time and kind of played with the idea of that, there's two languages that we're working with. One is a language of emotion, and when we're communicating with ourselves and others in that language, it's thick, it's confusing, it's all consuming, it's non-logical often. And well, really, I should say there's three languages. And then there's the other one, which is logic, right? We're like, well, what's logically happening here? We can kind of try to be really pragmatic and practical about it. And when we're doing that, we often aren't processing our emotions. We often use that as a bypass to go, oh, well, I'll just look at it this way, the reframing. But if we're reframing and leaving the emotional turmoil underneath it, it's just going to surface at some other point, like a big boil, it's going to come back out. And the third is really processing it from an energetic perspective, like, and really seeing that as a different language. When we move into our alignment and we use that aligned perspective technique that, if you've been listening for a while, you've probably heard us talk about that. That's that place where we go when we go into our full alignment, into the meditation, into that state of consciousness. And then we invite the experience of whatever it is that we're processing in there with us. And it forces us to look at it very differently because we're looking at it through a higher perspective. We're looking at it through a very different lens. And when that happens, a lot of stuff sorts very quickly and we're able to move it. Yet it also often leaves a little bit of residual stuff. There, at some point, there's the emotional energetics that tend to come back up. There's always other layers, and we need to learn to process those too. And so I think a lot of the processing can be done from an energetic perspective, from using the aligned perspective technique, but usually not all of it. Usually at some point, particularly if it's old trauma, stuff from our childhood that's really stuck deep in there, quite often in order to access it, we have to get into the emotion, into the feeling of it. And when we do that, if we can maintain that expansiveness, that spaciousness internally, where it's not the only experience we're having, that we're not just sucked into the feeling, to the emotion, to the, where we have no reference point, we have no mindfulness in it, we tend to get very stuck. We tend to spend a lot of time there. Maybe it doesn't get resolved. We go into victimhood. We go, it's always going to be some level of, disempowerment. But when we can go in there and, this is why I think a lot of people that help with trauma release are able to be the guide, be the mindfulness partner in it, but we can also do it for ourselves. We can go in there, and if we can maintain that spaciousness, we can actually be our own reference point, recognize what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and know that it's just a small story, and it's not the whole reality. So you're smiling away there, Nick. What you got?
Yeah, I was thinking of Chevy Chase and the vacation movies,
Yeah.
and they're in London and they're stuck on this roundabout.
Yeah, by
Right.
Big Ben.
Yeah,
or
Big Ben,
old
Parliament,
Ben,
right?
Old Ben,
Yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the third or fourth cycle around, whatever, he's like, "Hey, look, kids," and they're like, "We know, Big Ben Parliament." But it's like there's what you were talking about, this like this cycle that continues to just loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. It's like, oh, there's Big Ben again. Oh, there's big Parliament or Parliament, right?
Yeah.
And like you just never get off the roundabout, but there's exits everywhere. You're
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
for whatever reason you're stuck on the roundabout.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so the
Yeah.
trick is in that world, getting into the right hand lane or the left hand lane, however it works over there, and then getting find that off ramp. So it seems like there's multiple tools that we can use here, right? We can
Mhm.
use the line living system as sort of the navigational tool, and that helps
Yeah.
us quite a bit. And
Mhm.
then there may be some other tools for the off ramp or to stay off the roundabout,
Mhm.
possibly. Is
Yeah.
that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it comes down to, what are my intentions here when I'm feeling suddenly get triggered, right? Something goes into, shows up for me. I go into the emotion of it, like my world starts to shrink, and I'm having this experience of upsetness or, blame or, whatever it is that I'm experiencing. At that point, what are my intentions? Are my intentions to be upset? Are my intentions to be hurt? Are my intentions to be to acknowledge, some sort of victimhood, some sort of mistreatment, or are my intentions resolution and expansion? And if our intentions are too strong, this is kind of the tricky part. If our intentions are so strongly resolution and expansion that we don't let ourselves surface the part that needs to come up, we don't resolve it. And so it's this really interesting balancing point between allowing the emotions to come up, allowing the feelings, allowing the story, allowing our old experience to come up, and having the intention that we're bringing it up for it to move through, for us to acknowledge it and let it pass through and release. And usually what happens is we go, oh, there's my old friend. We cuddle up with it, and we go deep into our story and start on the roundabout, looping, retelling the story over and over again, versus going, oh, there's my story. Okay, let me feel into it a little bit more. Oh, there's that hurt. There's that piece. Okay, maybe the tears come, maybe the emotions
Yeah.
come. And as they're coming up, we're going, great. Now I can just keep them going. Like now, let me just shoot them right off that on off ramp, as opposed to sitting in them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in order to clear it, it's not that different in the beginning, other than our intentions. I'm going to let myself experience this upsetness, and then once it gets here, I'm gonna use now I can grab a hold of the snake and pull it out. But we kind of have to trick ourselves a little bit and go, okay, let me get upset. Let me get sideways in this so I can pull it up. Okay, great. Now I can kind of sneak attack on it and pull it out and let it go.
Yeah.
But if and maybe we need to do a few laps around the traffic circle, so to speak, in order to recognize this is what we're doing. But that those moments when it's coming up, like they're perfect right now for healing and clearing. And so many people are expanding. So many people are moving through old traumas, old victimhoods, all the things that held us back. And so I think it's a very timely conversation.
Hmm.
Um, and going like, well, have you been looping in that where you've been getting triggered by the same thing lately? Play with this. What does it feel like when I let it come up? And just like I normally would, but then once it's up here, all of a sudden I insert some mindfulness and go, all right, this is the time for me to just shoot it right out of me and just go, fuck this story. Like I'm so fucking sick of it. It's held me back
Yeah.
long enough.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about knowing exactly what happened and who did what. My focus is on not letting it hold me back anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I let me know. I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, there seems using the silly Chevy Chase model of the roundabout in the movie, like he can come out of that experience with more empathy for people who have bad driving experiences, right? So it changes your perception.
Right,
And
right.
he also may come out of it with like, I found a purpose in life, which is helping people navigate the roads better, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
which could help him through that traumatic. We'll assume it's traumatic, that right. But he can use that as something else in his world to then help other folks who have gone through similar situations. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right, and so whatever the situation is, whatever the trauma or the stuck energy is here, like it may be something that you need to release to move on to the next thing. But sometimes the next thing taking that traumatic experience and turning it upside down and doing something that's purposeful with it.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's a quick stage where we're just helping people with it. Sometimes it becomes an element of our work. Sometimes it becomes exactly what we're
The work.
doing. You
Yeah.
know, like, I mean, I'm a perfect example of that, right? Like, I was always so empathic and so inundated by my surroundings that when the Aligned Living download came for me, it was like,
Mm.
oh, this solves 90% of my struggles,
Hmm.
right? And it was just perfect for me. And I'm like, how many other empaths are there out there that are just getting their ass
Right.
kicked by the
Right.
world and following that same cycle of expansion and getting out there and loving being around people and then just needing to retreat and shut down and needing to get away from it all and trying to grow and make a bigger impact in the world. But the more you put yourself out there, the more it costs you. And to be able to break that cycle, to be able to have that freedom to show up, it changed everything in my life. and
Hmm.
and instantly, like when I got that download, I was driving to Colorado to work with clients on something that was completely different. And then when I got there, I started working with them with this, right? Like it was literally the next day.
Interesting.
And I'm like, well, here's something that happened yesterday. Let me share this with you. And then it shifted them and their experience of reality and the way that they engaged with other people and the way that they were able to show up. Um, that's a perfect example of, what are our biggest challenges in life. And when we overcome them, quite often they become gold,
Yeah,
that we can
they can
share
be
with
a
ourselves and
tool.
others. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Versus something that's a thorn in the side. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And,
That's cool.
I've seen that completely with like whatever area of life that I have a huge resolution in. It seems like all of a sudden a whole bunch of clients will come up needing to resolve that exact same thing. And I'm able to go like, oh, here's the answer. And they're like, well, shit, that's easy. That changes everything. I'm like, yeah, like this just happened to me for yesterday, for me yesterday.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that it happened that quickly for you. Like that
Yeah.
was that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I knew that story, that part of it, a piece of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it speaks to the mechanical nature of this work, right? Because we're going, if my emotional body is tapped in out there, this is my experience. If I move it as if it's something, concrete, from tapping in out there to tapping in here, all of a sudden my experience is different. If I point the
Yeah.
cameras and the microphones out there and then watch the screen, something's different on it than if I point them
Mm.
at me and watch the screen and listen to the speakers. And so it literally is that quick, that fast, and then it sets in motion all the other stuff that comes with it. The getting in touch with what you want, all the freedom, the expansion, the intuition jumping, the
Mm.
guidance, what it feels like to be in your body, because now your body is in resonance with self instead of in resonance with your surroundings.
Mm.
Like it all just instantly sets something in motion that plays out. That's why we do the 10-week programs, because it takes about 10 weeks for it to all play out. But the initial piece is instant.
Yeah, that's cool. You just used a phrase I haven't heard you use before. Intuition jumping. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, yeah. And so, that's our experience of it. Our intuition doesn't really jump. It's all the noise quiets around us. And so we're able to hear it. It's like the
Mm.
person next to us has been whispering to us the answers the whole time. And we've been listening to the loud voice. I mean, you
Right,
could say
right,
that
right,
that's
right.
an analogy for the world we live in, for the news that's yelling at us all the time, and for the, social media that's yelling at us all the time, and the leaders that are yelling at us all the time. And meanwhile, there's these quiet voices in the back going, well, here's what I would actually do. Like,
Yeah,
well, that's
yeah,
way better than the asshole up there yelling at me.
yeah, yeah. And typically has nothing to do with the asshole yelling at you.
Yeah, or what they're
Yeah,
even talking about. It's just something else that actually solves a problem.
totally. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that
funny.
feels unrelated.
Got it. Got it. So that's the quieting, the the getting rid of the noise and just being available to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, you've been here the whole time. I didn't even know.
Totally different. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And then you
yeah,
get to learn what that sounds like, what that feels like, and then you're more receptive to it. Yeah, it's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. And then you get to sort through, like, how does this guide me, and what is my
Totally.
relationship with this part of me?
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
and then we go like, well, why would I be listening to all that bullshit out there when I have this? Maybe I need these as, sounding boards. But my life wasn't mine before, because
yeah,
I was so pushed around by all that other noise. And then when
yeah.
our life becomes ours, and then of course, once our life becomes ours, the old traumas that held us back, we become much more aware of, and we want to resolve them. And so that brings us to our conversation today, because we end up cleaning up what's inside of us so much quicker, because we're not even aware of them. When the noise coming from us is so loud, that has all of our attention, our own things that are steering what feels good to us and what doesn't feel good to us based on past trauma and good experiences and bad experiences, on all the preferences that came not from what we really want, but from past experiences. Like, we start to be able to get in touch with that again. And once we're in touch with that, we seek resolution. And then next is this opportunity to go, well, can I move this energy? Can I move these old things out, or am I going to get stuck in them? And if we hold our alignment, they look very different. We have that expansiveness to be able to see them at the same time as we feel them. And if we don't hold our alignment, all we do is feel them and get stuck, and we're on the roundabout.
There we go. Yeah. So, and there's a piece of, like I was just imagining the elephant
Mm-hmm.
that's tied, with to the post with the chain, and there's
Yeah.
this learned, 2 feet away that I can move,
Yeah.
and then the chain comes off,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the elephant still doesn't move, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
this learned behavior, this learned
Yeah.
helplessness, because that's how it is.
Yeah. Or ground tying a horse. Like if you take a horse's reins and they're trained to be ground tied, their reins touch the ground and they don't move because the
Yeah.
reins are anchored to the ground,
Yeah.
even
Right.
though
Right.
they
Right.
could
Right.
just
Right.
walk away.
Yeah. And so it seems like there's a piece of that here where it's like,
Hmm.
this is just how it is type of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
sort of sucks, and this is how it is.
Yeah.
And there's an option for that to not be true.
Yeah. Absolutely. And how much too, like, how many times do people go, well, I wish that was available to me.
Right.
And, I remember I was talking to this was years ago. I was getting ready to move, uh, which I've done a few times, from Colorado, moving to San Diego. And I remember the neighbor came over. We were having a garage sale and getting rid of a bunch of stuff. And the neighbor came over. She's like, "Oh, I wish I had the freedom to just go somewhere." I'm like, "Why don't you?" And it was like, like, well, let me give you 10 reasons, why I have to stay here and be upset and feel like a victim,
Mm,
versus, let me give you 10 ways I could solve that. It was really interesting too. And then, like, for me, it was like, is there a conversation for me to have, right,
mm,
with her, of like, well, what if you looked at it this way? And I started, and I could feel her resistance come up right away. And I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't a conversation for me to have. She's not interested in resolving it. She's interested in being stuck. She's interested in being ground tied, or,
mm.
and it's so, when we start to play with those questions ourselves, are the limitations I'm putting on myself really limitations, or are they just reasons that feel appealing to me right now because of some unresolved thing that makes me feel like I don't have the freedom that I actually have. Um,
Wow. That seems like the description of the podcast right there. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Woo.
yeah, because really what we're talking about is freedom, and anything that's unresolved in us is a limitation of freedom. And
Yeah.
we often call them preferences. Oh, I don't like to travel. Oh, I don't like to go to parties, or I love to go to parties. I don't like to be home alone by myself. I'm always looking to be like, these are all preferences. Like,
Mm,
do I prefer to be alone? Well, that's, we all have, maybe there's tendencies towards one over the other, or balance, but quite
hmm.
often it's driven by past experiences, or the ways that we've showed up, or the situations we've been in. And then we just start to live into them until they become more and more real. And when we resolve them, all of a sudden now, like, what's available to us just jumps. Um,
Yeah.
and it's freedom. And that's, we talk about joy here, but we also talk about fulfillment. And when we have a whole array available to us, that's where our fulfillment comes in. When we're shutting
Mm,
down our options, we're never fulfilled. We're always trying to
hmm.
find the next thing that fits inside the little container we've created for ourselves,
Hmm.
that's going to bring a little bit better life. But the
Hmm.
fulfillment only really happens when we can expand our container. And the only way we can expand our container is to work through those old limitations that are put in place by old traumas and old bad experiences from the past, or things we were taught, about what's available to us and what's not available to us.
Yeah. Yeah. So a little exploration can go a long way. A little believing of things can change can go a long way, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
seems like,
yeah,
right, intention and action, like that phrase just keeps on coming up more and more for me.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
if the intention is to have this, and you need to be able to imagine it,
Hmm. Yeah.
then you need to have action to follow up with it. And there's going to be points where it doesn't work the way that you magically thought it would because
Because you have
right
something
because
unresolved and you got to deal with your shit, right?
yeah, and
Yeah,
also things show up, right? Like
yeah,
not everything is super easy. So if this woman you're talking about was like, oh, I can move someplace, and then she calls a moving company, and they're like, it's $1,000 to move, and she only has $900 in the bank, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh, yeah, I can't do it,
yeah,
unless of course you planned it out 6 months later, you saved your nickels and dimes, and you
yeah,
had right, and you just plan it,
yeah. Or you tell
and
your
then you get
friends and
over,
family and they go, "You can't do that." And then you believe
right,
them. Or you go, you know, you're abandoning me. Oh, well, I can't do that. Like I need
right,
to pace myself with your trauma, not mine. Um,
yeah,
right.
yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of things that can show up for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think some of it too is realizing that we can have whatever we want. I It's funny. I grew up on, you know, in the country in the middle of nowhere. We had like three channels on our TV, dead end dirt road. And when I went to college, my roommate goes, we got an apartment together, and he goes, "Hey, let's get cable." And I was like, "We can get cable?" You know, like it didn't occur to me that could be available to me. I could have cable. Um,
That's
you
awesome.
know, and it was like so amazing for about a week, and I'm like, this is just like a bunch of shit. It's not that interesting, but it never occurred to me that that was available to me, you
Yeah.
know. uh
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Hawaii and like we didn't do any big traveling growing up.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so like Hawaii just felt like this far off, removed, wish. And then a buddy of mine who was out there was like, "Look, I'm going to be out here for another month. Like it's either now or not for you."
right,
And I forget who I talked to, but they're like, "Why don't you go?" And it was really just someone asking the question like, "Why don't you go?" And I didn't have a good answer of why I
yeah.
shouldn't.
Why am I limiting myself? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because I was sort of used to that framework, right?
right,
Like
right, yeah,
this is it. I go
yeah,
here.
yeah,
I
on the
don't go out
roundabout.
here. I go
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
This is my existence, not out here. And it was great to go. It
yeah,
was great.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it
right.
was
Like I can just buy a plane ticket, get a hotel, get a rental car. Like, oh my God,
yeah.
I just and same thing. I grew up, we didn't travel. We traveled for holidays to relatives' house, you know, same kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, like in college again, somebody invited me on a trip, and I'm like fly somewhere?
Right.
You know, like,
Right.
but we don't know, you know, like we don't have any relatives there. You know,
Right.
like, oh, we
Right.
get a hotel? Like what?
Right.
Like this is a whole new world to me.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure the conversation, I'm remembering it a little bit, was like, well, why don't you go? And I'll,
Yeah, yeah,
and then it was sort of what you just said, like, well, the plane ticket is probably this much. To get a car is probably this much. Where are you
yeah,
staying? And like,
yeah,
and those are sort of the things I needed to hear at the time to sort of like contextualize it and plan it out.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and the more that conversation happened, the more the opportunity of it showing up became real versus this
yeah.
far away place on a map.
Exactly. It goes
Yeah.
from like a something I didn't even dream of to just easy.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then and
Yeah.
then I was on whatever the site was of the day,
Mm,
Travelocity or whatever it was, and
yeah.
or Priceline. I imagine it was Priceline at the time, right? Right. It's like, did you want to gamble for your plane ticket? I do. Um, and save $50. That's a lot. Yes. Um, and then it all happened, started to work out. It was super cool. And so just and that changes that one thing changes your perception of a lot of things,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I can just do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, right, right,
Yes.
right, right.
I had a very similar
Yeah.
experience with Hawaii. Like a client had a space there they wanted me to come look at for possible retreats. And I'm like, sure. Like I hadn't thought about going to Hawaii, especially growing up on the East Coast. I went and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
this was a short flight relatively. Like it was easy
Mm-hmm.
to, and then, you know, a couple months later I went back again because it's easy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. Breaking those invisible barriers.
Totally. Break
Awesome.
that shit down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's been inspiring for you. And, you know, if you're sitting there listening to this and going like, oh shit, like I have been living in this very small sense of what's available to me. Um, you know, sometimes there's an initial piece of like, oh, that doesn't feel good, but let it shift into like, this is pretty damn exciting. If I start to break these barriers for myself and the world starts to open up, again, that's where fulfillment is. Like, there's
Totally.
not too often that fulfillment happens in the little bubble that we've created for ourselves. We have to pop it and then pop the one on the outside of that and the one on the outside of that and the one on the outside of that.
Yeah.
And it just we keep needing more expansion for our fulfillment because we're here to be free and we're here to be self-expressed. And when we limit that, it just doesn't work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
just did this for a client that I'm working with, and we're chatting about what it could look like to make money,
Hmm.
and I was like, well, let's break this down. The cost of widgets, like how many do you sell and what does it take? And she's like, I need to make this much money a month. And funny enough, we were off by like $100.
Right.
And then
Right.
and then we started talking about the cost of what she was selling the widgets for. I don't want to get
Yeah.
the client
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, well, how much do other people charge for this type of thing? Oh, like double.
Yeah.
Well, then
Yeah.
you're undercharging. Like, so what if we changed how much you charge for each and
Yeah.
every one of these things? And now we're over the goal,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it really very similar conversation of back in the day when someone say, "Can you imagine going to Hawaii?" and I didn't have a good answer, and then they start to just go through the line items of my barriers essentially, and that's what happened just yesterday with this client, and looking
Yeah.
at what
Yeah.
things cost and how much she can sell it for, and how close are we to that number, and
Yeah.
does that seem reasonable? It does. Okay. Is
Right.
everything
Right.
else a distraction now? It sort of feels that way. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
we're gonna do
Yeah.
less of those things. We're gonna do way more of these things.
Yeah. Absolutely. It does get that simple.
Yeah.
So yeah. Awesome. Well, great conversation, man. And yeah, hopefully it's inspiring. Check out the we say this every week. There's, all these free offerings that we have that are linked in the show notes. So if you haven't done any of the aligned living work and you're curious about it, pick the one that feels most resonant to you, the most um the one that you think is gonna align with you. Because I think there's 3 different free offerings on there to introduce you to what aligned living is and how it could work in your life. And it changes things quick.
Changes everything.
Yeah, awesome. Well, have a great week, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the aligned living system and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.